Okay, we'll give it a couple, just a little bit more time um, to just let a few more people in. Maybe just 1 minute and we'll get started. It's just 11 now, so or depending on where you are. A few more people I see coming in. Yeah, participants number is climbing, so we'll just hold off for a couple minutes or a minute. All right, it's 11:01 here in California. So I guess it's good morning and good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Um, Hi, everybody. I'm Beth Sirull. I am the president and CEO of the National Organization on Disability, and this is the first of our CEO Office Hours series. To start with, I am a white presenting 63-year-old woman with silver hair, I'm going to say, that is styled in a bob. I have big over-the-ear headphones on today. I am wearing a pink shell with a black jacket on top, and I have a bright pink flower on my lapel to celebrate a little bit of spring. And my background is kind of an ocean blue with three watercolors by an artist that I met in Stockholm. And there is a dried flower arrangement behind me that I am proud to say I made. Um, and so, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to have you. I think many of you know here at NOD, we are very committed to creating a world where every person with a disability has access to meaningful employment, opportunities for advancement, and really the opportunity to reach their full potential and be. Oh, it's a bit hard to hear. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Oh, well, that is interesting. Is that better? I'm going to hope that that's okay. Okay, people are saying that that is better. My apologies. Somehow my volume got turned down a little bit, unbeknownst to me. Um, yeah, so NOD works with employers who are committed to creating a disability inclusive workplaces. But really, a lot of employees are committed and not quite sure how to fulfill that commitment. And that's where NOD comes in, that we really work with employers to build those disability inclusive workplaces. And I am thrilled today to have Meredith Sadoulet with me. And I will let her introduce herself in a minute. I'll just take a second and say, when we think about attracting talent, we're going to be talking today about talent acquisition writ large, but also specifically through the lens of disability with a little bit of a tilt towards talent acquisition for higher level positions. And really when done right, you have the broadest pipeline, the deepest pipeline, and you can choose the best talent for what you need for your business. And properly supported, people with disabilities will stay longer and do more. We actually, from our research, know that companies that fully integrate disability inclusion into their operations will hire 2 times as many people with disabilities, but they will promote 5 times as many people with disabilities, which is a solid indicator that when you hire in a disability agnostic way and support your employees, you get to sit back and reap the rewards um, of a highly engaged workforce. So we're going to explore today building inclusive pipelines, improving the candidate experience, and sort of, better aligning hiring priorities with business priorities. And with that, I'm going to welcome my really good friend. We're cross country here, California to Philadelphia, but we do maintain a really, really special friendship. So Meredith, I'm so glad you're with me. I'm going to introduce yourself. You'll do a better job than I will. So tell us about you and your career and what brings you here today. And yeah.
Thank you, Beth. Well, hello, everyone. As Beth mentioned, my name is Meredith Sadoulet. I'm a woman with light skin, green eyes, and shoulder length blonde hair. I'm wearing a gray shirt today and a black blazer. My background is my chosen purple wallpaper. So when I decided to change the wall in my office, I hadn't really worked with wallpaper before, and I definitely had not worked with the color purple in a room, but I decided to go for it, and I love it. You can't really see it on video, but there's a really cool texture to the wallpaper. Um, so that's where I am today in my office in Philly. Um, First, I just wanted to say I'm really delighted to be here today. I'd like to thank NOD for this collaboration and partnership. Beth, it's truly delightful to work with you. Beth and I
Oh,
have become fast friends as we've come to know each other. And Beth, I just have deep respect for your talented team. They're just fantastic. And so I was just so honored to have this invitation today. And of course, I'd like to also thank the attendees. I know that you can choose many ways to spend your time and spend your
100%.
day, and you chose to spend some of it with us. So we're looking forward to the conversation. So, a bit about myself. I'm really proud to be an entrepreneur. There's this new word buzzing around called mompreneur, and I'm also that. So I'm a mom of four kids, ages 16 to 22. So I consider myself this cool word mompreneur, but also entrepreneur. And I'm the founder and CEO of Profound Executive Search. Our search firm is a firm that has a specialty in identifying who we believe are exceptional leaders for nonprofits, universities, foundations, corporations, really any mission-driven organization. And I'll share a bit more about Profound in a moment, but in terms of my professional background, I spent about 25 years in a corporate career across several Fortune 100 companies. For the first decade, I was in a variety of finance and strategy roles. And then for the latter part, I led HR functions across talent acquisition, leadership development, learning, compensation, you name it, in the world of HR. I've had the pleasure of working in those spaces. I've served on the national board of the ARC of the United States for 5 years, and I currently serve as its national board president. And so, for those of you that don't know the ARC, it is the oldest and largest nonprofit in the US dedicated to advocacy and services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It has about 600 chapters across the country. So I do that in my spare time when I'm not running my company. My personal connection to disability advocacy is that I have OCD and anxiety disorder, and I have family members with autism. And so I've been a longstanding advocate in my professional career as well. I left my corporate career about 4 years ago to establish Profound, and it has just been a dream come true. I think one of the things that really differentiates us is that we bring a broad and trusted network across the disability community to our work and a commitment to ensuring that search processes are inclusive and accessible from start to finish. So, for those of you that work with external partners on hiring strategies, I'd love to connect with you. Beth and the team and I have established an arrangement so that for those of you on the call today who may have a tier of membership through NOD, my firm offers a strategy meeting to help your organization with its talent strategy. So hopefully, this is just the beginning of some of those connections, and we'll get to know each other better over time. So that's a
Oh,
bit about me.
excellent. Well, let's start kind of broadly. Oh, and I should say, we're going to talk for maybe 20 minutes or so with some questions that I have, and then I'm going to open it up to the participants for question and answer. And I believe you can just put your questions in the chat, and we will get to them the last 15 minutes of our 45 minutes. So let's start sort of broadly, Meredith. Over your time, working in HR, both profound and before, um, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in talent acquisition, and particularly, sort of overall, but then through a lens of disability as well?
Sure. Yes, I thought I would really drill down on some of the trends I've seen around disability, given the context of the discussion today. Um, so first, again, just a bit more context about myself. So because I spent the first decade of my career in finance, I'm someone who's pretty comfortable with numbers and data. And so when I transitioned my career into the field of HR, I really wanted to work on HR strategies that I thought could make impact at scale. So I gravitated toward and accepted roles in organizations where the workforce was very large and where the HR strategy could impact a lot of people. And I wanted to soak up knowledge around talent like a sponge because this was a career pivot for me. And so one of the things I did was chaired a talent acquisition committee that spanned across many organizations. And that was a great way for me to get exposure to not just what was happening in the company where I was working at the time, but how are many organizations handling it? And so one of the trends I saw when I entered the field of HR was that a lot of organizations were addressing disability inclusion through targeted hiring programs. Um, Personally, I've always believed that every individual is unique. And I haven't really supported the idea of sorting people into rigid categories and assuming that, types of people fit into types of roles. So for that reason, I'll give an example of one I heard about often when I first went into the field of HR, and that was, oh, we have a specific hiring program for people with autism, putting those people into, tech or coding roles. And, I know that there was good intention behind that, for organizations that were doing that. But I see limitations to that. And so the trend that I have seen change, which I'm really happy about, is that there's been less focus on program and more focus on process. So why is that? Some of the limitations to programs, one, they're often pretty small and separate from core hiring processes, which means that they don't meaningfully shift overall workforce composition, right? Even if you create a robust program with 100 people, it's 100 people on thousands. Secondly, programs like this are hard to sustain. There really needs to be an internal champion, there needs to be funding for it. And sometimes when those champions shift roles or shift priorities, then the support
Totally.
structure goes away. And then, finally, I think programs like that really contain inclusion efforts to a single initiative rather than making it a shared responsibility or making it a shared accountability and commitment across the organization. So I've always seen some flaws with programs. Where I'm seeing things head and I'm delighted about is process because, process scales across organizations. It can apply to every role, every candidate, every hiring manager. It's more consistent, it's more equitable, and it really creates capability and accountability across the organization rather than isolating it to a small team of people focusing on that work. So that would be one big change that I'm really happy to see. Another one is I think when I moved into the field of HR and I was asking folks about disability inclusion, a lot of the conversations immediately went to, well, we're trying to focus on employment as a goal, just period, employment. And That's an important goal. It's a place to start. But I'm so delighted to see the conversations we're having today, which are now about engagement and promotion and retention and inclusion and leadership. And so when I started Profound, for example, 4 years ago, I went out and surveyed and had focus groups with about 300 leaders. And I was asking
Mhm.
people, how are you thinking about disability leadership? And even that term 4 years ago, folks were like, well, what do you mean
What
by
do you,
that? What do you mean by disability leadership? And that shouldn't be a shocking question, but at the time it was kind of a term that maybe folks weren't thinking about. And that has changed a lot in the 4 years. Now, we're having discussions about board composition, we're having discussions about leadership team composition, and people understand that lived experience in leadership brings product concepts, it brings customer service perspectives, it brings marketing ideas. And so we've moved well beyond the goal simply of employment, and we're talking about inclusion in all levels of the organization, in all roles. And I think that's, come a long way.
well, it's interesting you say that because we've seen the same sort of evolution more broadly, like as a nonprofit in this space, where, NOD is 43 years old, and early on, disability was very much about charity. And then it became, okay, it makes sort of business sense. Well, we'll have these programs as you were talking about. And now we're seeing it move, and we are quite honestly trying to push it to business imperative,
Yes.
where, well, we know that 20% of the population is neurodivergent. We know that 25% of the population will be struggling with a mental health challenge at any given moment. And something like 25% of the population has a physical, identifies as having a significant physical or mental disability. When you add all, it's not additive because there's co-occurrence, obviously. But even when you allow for overlap, we're talking about 35-40% of the workforce that grapples with something, whether it's ADHD or autism or, one of the other neurodivergent neurotypes, or is dealing with anxiety and depression, or they're bipolar, or they have an autoimmune disease, or they're missing a limb, or they have what I might call the more traditional disabilities. But we're really trying to push it to where we realize that every individuals are unique people by
Yeah.
definition, and um, the vast majority need some kind of adjustment to do their job super well.
Yeah,
And
disability is it's just a natural part of the human condition.
condition, right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But we're seeing that same evolution when you talk about, the program to process. It's very much the charity to program to business imperative, because no employer, no organization on the planet is going to maximize their performance if they're ignoring the needs of 30-40% of their workforce. That is just not possible.
Exactly.
And so that sort of addresses the business case. And we're sort of harping on the business case a lot. Is there anything you want to add to the, in terms of making that business case when you talk to your clients?
Well, I think you said a lot of it well, but I think the obvious but important to state fact about inclusive hiring at the leadership level and the business case for it is just when organizations limit themselves to narrow definitions of leadership, they're competing within the same pool of candidates. And so inclusive hiring really opens the aperture. It brings in different leaders with different lived experiences, different problem solving approaches, different leadership styles, different networks. And all of, those tentacles that are out there between different connections with different people bring a competitive advantage. And we know at a leadership level, leaders are shaping strategy, they're shaping the culture, they're shaping decision making. So I think the impact is really amplified. Thankfully, due to organizations like yours, there's great research that has proven that the business case is there.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
thankfully, many organizations are becoming familiar with that.
and we completely agree. So let's switch gears a little bit. I think one of the other trends in talent acquisition that has really is really hitting the environment today is how AI is being used in talent acquisition. So what would you say about that? Good, bad, indifferent, and
Sure.
particularly how that impacts people with disabilities?
Sure. Um, So I know you know this about me, Beth, and others that know me maybe on the call know I don't have a shortage of opinions. So much like I had a strong opinion about programs, that I have an opinion about AI too. It is rapidly playing a role in hiring, and so I'll share some of the ways we're seeing AI infused in hiring practices. So LinkedIn, for example, already has these AI agents that scan job postings and recommend candidates for recruiters to consider. So that's happening today. Some organizations are using AI to accelerate research on a talent market. Some are using AI to filter through applicant pools at
Mhm.
early stages. Some are using AI to conduct or supplement interviews. By the way, that hasn't been particularly well received by candidates. So there's some data out there that says about 50% of candidates have been exposed to some form of AI interview, whether it's, pre-recorded questions that you then record a response to, but then AI on the other side is assessing the response. There are AI chatbots that are being used to help manage candidate questions. And it's also being used to simplify workflows for stage with early adoption of AI. I feel it's best used in a hiring process really to enhance process efficiency and where possible to expand rather than filter access. So I think there are a lot of risks and flaws to the filtering strategy.
Right.
We know that there's bias in historical data that's baked in. And so I think there's a lot of risk around that. Um,
Yeah.
I think about it within Profound as how can we build a more inclusive process with AI? And one specific example is we like to produce all of our materials in plain language. And so that's just, a universal design concept. When we remove jargon, when we remove acronyms, when we try to understand that plain language is better for everyone and easier to understand for everyone and reduces cognitive load, it's just a better process. So we're using AI in that way. We're using AI in terms of process efficiency to manage workflows, for example, in our CRM. But I do think there's a lot of risk in using AI to assess candidates at this stage.
A- And any sense, where do you think it will go over the next 5 years? Any predictions?
Well, I think we're all seeing and probably reviewing the same articles, which is just the rate of adoption is incredible.
Yeah.
But what I'm happy to see is that, and I'm sure we're also seeing the charts about jobs that are being replaced and, fields to perhaps consider avoiding because of those fields becoming obsolete. What I'm pleased to see is that fields involving human interaction are not on those charts right now. People realize that human interaction cannot be replaced by technology, and people don't want it replaced by technology. And hiring processes are exactly that, determining career opportunities for folks and collaboration is, I think, not well suited for
Yeah.
AI. So my prediction is that sure, some companies will test it out because there's always the allure of could we do things less expensively? But I think long term, adoption of AI in terms of assessing people and making hiring selections, my prediction is that it won't be well received.
Well, I have seen or heard many people, or a number of people say that AI won't take your job, but people who know how to use AI will take your job. And I think there's probably some truth to that, that your job may change. Um, so let's move along from that, um, into some more practical questions about building inclusive talent systems and pipelines. Give us your sense and maybe some, key points or things to do to build and sustain a truly inclusive talent pipeline, particularly of people with disabilities, and how to ensure that that pipeline remains inclusive from the top of the funnel to the higher.
Sure. Um, so I'll share some tactical tips here because I know, when I attend a call like this, I love the theory, but I also want to
Right.
leave the meeting with, what can I do now? What can I implement? That, by the way, I don't need to get budget approval for, that doesn't take 6 months to get approved, et cetera. So I try to think of some things that are my favorites in terms of, tactical implementation tips. Um, so the first one is going to go back to process design. And I would focus on job descriptions as a way to really think about, building and sustaining a really inclusive pipeline. So I geek out over this topic because it's something that, again, it doesn't cost money to implement, and every organization can be doing. And the research proves that the results and the outcomes are there when you make this change. Um, so when we think about job descriptions, I'll start with maybe some research. So Harvard Business Review years ago published some research. I'm sure many of you may be familiar with it. At that time, that particular study said that men tend to apply for a job when they meet 50 to 60% of listed qualifications, and women tend to apply typically only when they meet close to 100% of the qualifications.
Yep.
And it wasn't that women are necessarily less confident, but they're more likely to take listed qualifications literally and to view requirements as firm criteria rather than flexible guidelines. And what they found in the research was that the men were more likely to interpret qualifications as a wish list rather than a checklist. Well, there's
Mm.
been subsequent research produced that found that professionals with disabilities are also likely to self-select out of opportunities due to concerns about meeting all listed qualifications. So a classic one and a classic piece of research is really around individuals with autism and job descriptions with language about written and oral communication skills. I imagine if many of you do a quick audit in your organizations after this meeting today, the percentage of job descriptions that require excellent oral and written communication skills, it's pretty significant. A lot of organizations just throw that in there as a required qualification. But it can deter folks because when they read that as a requirement, they know that that assessment is pretty subjective. And they also assume that when that bullet is there, that there's a requirement around neurotypical communication styles. For example, fast verbal processing or social nuance. And so if you start with job descriptions, it really goes back to really assess what is truly required for the role versus what is preferred. Um, and also, think about, is it written in plain language? And are you writing about outcomes versus the way work has to be performed? There's a lot of research, again, that proves when you make those changes, you naturally will have a much more inclusive talent pool. So that's one. A second tip I would give, another super simple one, doesn't take any budget to commit to it. And that I describe as this rule of seven. So marketing has this concept that says that, for someone to start to be familiar with a product, they have to hear about it 7 times. I believe the same is true in the world of hiring. It's not enough to have on a website, let us know if you need an accommodation. And even that language isn't my favorite. I like to go out to candidate pools and let people know our commitment is to ensuring a welcoming and inclusive process. If we can do anything to ensure that, please let us know. And the rule of seven comes back to, are you saying that at least seven times? Do you have it on every email communication? Do you have it on your application portal? Are you starting every interview process with that? And again, not necessarily gearing toward, do you need an accommodation, but rather, how can we make this a great experience for you? That's universal design right there, and everyone appreciates that. And then the last thing I would say is really thinking about the interview design itself. A lot of organizations love to hold the questions close to the vest until you're actually in the interview. The number of people who say, oh, but people are going to game the system if you send the questions in advance. I just don't agree with that. I feel like, hey, in a business context, we're all expected to prepare. So letting someone know what the topics are that you're going to be discussing and letting them prepare adequately for that is just enabling candidates to show up at their best. So really thinking about providing advance notice and even designing interview processes that are less about Q&A and more about role plays or case studies or scenarios that will actually happen on the job, I think are more relevant. So those are a couple of quick tips from a hiring perspective that are easily implementable. You can do them today without budget, and hopefully with not extensive approvals, but the research proves they make a huge difference.
Right. I mean, when we work with employers, we will often look at job descriptions for organizations, and that distinction between what is really critical to do the job, what is nice to have, and what's unimportant is really that's critical.
Yeah.
And I always say that in so many cases today, the skills that it takes to get a job are not correlated with the skills that it takes to do the job. And what you really want to do is design your process so that the skills that it takes to get the job are the same as the skills that it takes to do the job. So I would argue that there are cases where the job requires you to be really quick on your feet. And then I'm not going to provide the questions in advance for that particular position. Whereas in the vast majority of situations, that's not relevant. And so it's really, I think, about designing and thinking about what do you have to do to align that the skills it takes to do the job and the skills it takes to get the job are the same set of skills.
I love that framework. Yeah, you're so right. Oftentimes these interview processes have been designed around who's good in an interview setting
Right.
versus what is really needed for this role and how do we make sure that the structure is designed for that.
That's exactly right. And it can differ a little bit from position to position or industry to industry. But if you keep the framework of what's really critical to do this job, and how do I set up a situation so that people can truly demonstrate that they have those skills and that they can do that work, like the case studies,
Yeah.
and not blurry it with things that are much less important for the particular job that you're hiring for. So it looks like there are some questions in the chat. Hang on a second here. Blah blah blah. Someone wants to know, Meredith, is your firm focused on C-suite and whoops, hold on a second. Just my chat just um uh and board is your firm focused on C-suite and board level leadership roles?
Yes, we are focused on those, but really our primary focus is anything director level and above. So we hire for CEO, executive director, certainly board roles, but then, director, VP, SVP, et cetera, are all within scope for us. With that said, my career has spanned well beyond those leadership roles. And so again, if you're um, part of the membership tier within NOD, we could have an advisory call on any of those topics.
And then someone is asking a very specific question about how often do you have to speak with employers about a driver's license requirement? I feel like that's a non-inclusive thing that gets thrown on every job posting. I'd love more tips on how to speak with employers about this.
Oh, that's a great
I mean,
question.
it is a good question because it is sort of that whole, it's sort of similar to that uh, communication skills that you were talking about. It's just sort
Exactly.
of it's a throw in.
Yeah, I think the best way to combat that, again, my tip would be if you have the tools and capability to do an audit of your postings or job descriptions and look at some of those requirements that come up most consistently. And then if you present that to leadership, it's just such a robust discussion because you'll be surprised at the requirements that come up most frequently. And even just presenting that data and asking for reactions among your leadership team usually opens the door for the discussion around why do we have these requirements in so many? Is this true? Is this actually a requirement and a qualification for the job? So, back to the communication point, um, one of my teams did that exercise, and it was such a robust discussion on the other side because the leadership team said, well, of course, I would imagine for roles in communications or in PR, yes, we would expect certain requirements around communication skills, but is it really true that 90+% of our roles need quote unquote strong communication skills? I don't think so. So my suggestion would be whether it's driver's license
Or
or
any
other
other.
requirements that seem pervasive, if you can do a study and even say, these are the top 10 requirements that are most prevalent across all roles. Does this make sense to us? It can lead to a really interesting discussion.
But that's a really interesting sort of audit process across
Absolutely.
all your, like pick out the 5 or 10 things that are show up most frequently on your job description and why is it there? Because let's be real, most people start their job descriptions, they start drafting them from a previous job.
Yes, they do.
They pull
Yes,
up you pull up the job description that you most recently hired for and you start editing.
exactly.
And then instead of adding what's essential, you don't as if you started from a blank sheet of paper, would you really include this?
Exactly. And to your point earlier, Beth, I know we wanted to talk about kind of long-term workforce needs. And you're exactly right. I've worked in organizations and I know how it works. And even within my own teams, it's human nature that when someone departs the organization, you very quickly, your mind immediately goes to, I don't want to lose the head count.
Mm,
I quickly need to redefine this role. Everyone asks for where's the last job description for this? And it's exactly what you said. The tendency is to say, okay, most of this is good. What do I add or refine slightly? Instead of actually thinking about what does the organization need longer term? And how do we think about bringing in people that will grow, evolve, contribute to the organization in a
over time.
variety of ways over time? That takes more time to define, but again, in the whole scheme of return on investment, it's so much of a better investment to build roles that can ebb and flow and grow with the organization rather than something that's super
Right.
specific and only for what you need
It's
right now, or even worse, needed 2 years ago.
right. It's sort of like, it's like the NOD team, we're all bench players. Like everybody can, not everybody, but there's a lot of ability to pinch hit for the other person. And when you have that, you have a stronger team. When you
Exactly.
can really think about that. I agree. Um, Someone is asking if you have seen a shift with employers in this political climate.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's
And what,
been an interesting shift. I think many of us probably observed early on with the administration change, a lot of fear, um, a lot of hesitation about the unknown. And unfortunately, a lot of employers retracting and retreating from their previous commitments. Um, I I'm starting to see the pendulum swing back in a good way, and that many organizations are having those conversations to say, was this just a temporary commitment? Are we bold and courageous enough to continue to make our commitments despite the current political environment? So I'm seeing organizations develop more courage about that. Um, but it's a challenging time that we're in. And one of the topics that I love to discuss with organizations is that if they want to continue to commit to inclusion, disability inclusion is a great topic to
Yes.
commit to because it is one of the few dimensions of diversity that cuts across all demographics. And it's uniting. As we said at the beginning of this meeting, it's something that that touches so many of us. And whether you're born with a disability or you acquire it or um, you're touched through a family member. It's something that's really a natural part of the human experience. So, for organizations that are looking for a way to remain committed to inclusion, I encourage them to consider really leaning in and learning much more about disability inclusion, because we've already talked about the business benefits to it, but also it's a way to bring unity in our country right now when there's a lot of polarization.
I often say that when you do disability inclusion, you're just doing inclusion writ large
Yes,
because there is, disability does not discriminate across gender, rate, it is part of the human experience 100%. Um, and it is also uh, the least from a regulatory standpoint right now, it's the most welcome, although it might not be welcome, it's the least attacked of the DEI, the traditional DEI elements, if you will. Um, and it also lends itself to universal design. And when you are doing universal design, you are being inclusive by definition of everybody. And when we move from program to process, and we design process for universal design for everybody, you're doing exactly what the regulations really want you to do. And you're being inclusive. So you're meeting the law 100%, and you are building a really inclusive workplace
exactly. I'll give you a
100%.
specific example of that, Beth. So when I joined the board of the ARC, I was introduced to their standard practice, which is all board materials are written in plain language, and they're all issued at least a week in advance of the meeting.
Yep.
And as many of you know, board packets can be really extensive with, 50, 60 pages to review. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where someone has emailed information to us, an hour before a meeting, and you're in another meeting, so you don't even get to look at it, or maybe you review it, and it's just too much to consume and digest in a period of time. And so, it's a simple commitment, but it's one that benefits absolutely everyone. And, for folks that may need more processing time, it's fantastic. And for folks who are comfortable looking at materials in an hour in advance, they can still do that. But the plain language really takes concepts that we need everyone to understand, whether it's financials or strategy, and makes it accessible to everyone. So I'm a huge believer in universal design, and I think there's a long way that organizations can go to even adopt those principles. And again, they
100%.
cost nothing. They cost nothing to do.
100%. I'm going to ask you one other quick question before I close. Someone is asking about if you're seeing an increase in fractional roles at the executive level, and is that, if that's becoming more common, how does that intersect with disability, do you think?
I am seeing an increase in fractional roles, and I'm delighted by that because it's just to me another form of flexibility. We live and work in a time where, kind of when I think about my parents and their career experience, it was loyalty and commitment to a single or maybe two employers over your lifetime. And frankly, the loyalty doesn't exist these days from
No, it
employers, and so we shouldn't expect individuals to have that same degree of loyalty either. So I love the concept of fractional roles. I love gigs that are cropping up across a lot of organizations. I've always been a fan of rotational programs. I think these are just ways for people to get
right.
exposure
Bench
to
players to
exactly
build bench
and
players.
to build not only skills but also context that is really powerful in an organization. The more
Interpersonal.
context you have, the more you can contribute.
Well, I have to be respectful of everybody's time. We said 45 minutes. I know Meredith and I will hang out for a few minutes if people want to get on camera and ask, or just stay on and ask us some other questions. But I want to thank you, Meredith, so much for your time. Um, we've really seen that when you commit to inclusive hiring and you really go the distance, not just to commit to it, but to really take it to heart and do it, we see some really significant business benefits. That's what NOD is here for. To help you do that. And I'll just announce really quickly before I sign off, or before we conclude, um, because we feel so strongly about the importance of disability inclusion being uh, really pushed out into the extremities of an organization, not just in HR, and but with hiring managers who are in operating roles and with managers in general in operating roles. On July 1st, we are rolling out something called Enable Learning, which is an online on-demand training program um, to help managers learn really to manage with universal design, but in particular to be uh, disability aware, to manage neurodiverse teams, to know how to approach mental health issues in the workplace, and to ensure that managers are able to create and ensure a digital inclusion and inclusive AI. I hope you'll want to learn more. And again, thank you so much for your time. And as I said, Meredith and I'll hang out for a few minutes if anybody wants to ask any other questions. So thank you so much, Meredith. And thank you all for spending your 45 minutes with us today. As Meredith said, we know you got a lot of demands on your time. We appreciate that you stayed with us for this conversation.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks everyone for joining. I hope we'll stay connected.
All right, I'm staying on. Can I ask a question?
You certainly may.
All right, so I'm on the flip side. I'm not an